Good afternoon. It's fabulous to be in Singapore. This doesn't quite look like my first slide, actually, but I'll go there. You've all been trained, even you've been trained by now in sustainability after two great panels with a wide range of opinions. So I'm really honored to be here in Singapore. We, in this session, are going to launch the Business Council for Sustainable Development here in Singapore. But later today, we're also going to launch the TEEP for Business Coalition, which is an equally important event in the world of sustainability. I apologize, it must be all the air travel that I get to do, talking about sustainability. So before we do the official signing of documents bit, let me give you my perspective of where the world of sustainability is at. So I represent WBCSD, which is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, based in Geneva, which, as you can see from all the logos behind me, are 200 of the largest global companies working together to really make an impact on sustainable development of the world. Next to these 200 global companies, we used to operate 62 regional networks in countries around the world, developing countries, but more and more also into the mature economies. And today, actually, we will be launching the number 63, which is going to be the BCSD here in Singapore. And the launching members are listed here, but I'll get back to this slide later on if I know how to work this machine. Let me, just to reiterate some of the things that the panels have been saying, take you quickly through the state of the world. Because if you're not part of the sustainability space like I am, you have no idea how much talk in the world there has been going on. Sustainability might be new to some, but actually in the world we've been talking about these issues for the last 40 years. It was the Club of Rome in 1970, which for the first time produced a document called The Limits of Growth. In 92, the world under the UN guidance came together in Rio to talk about the Earth Summit. In 92, they published a document called Agenda 21. I don't know if any of you have ever studied that, but if you were to download it today from the internet, you would be amazed how up-to-date that document is in its description of the challenges that the world faces. The only real change compared to that is that all these challenges have become so much more urgent. Then 10 years later, Joburg, and only 3-4 months ago, we met again in Rio in a thing called Rio Plus 20. And again, for those of you a little less familiar with this part of the world, 55,000 people met for a whole week in Rio to talk about sustainability in the world. And this was only the official conference. 12 kilometers down the beach, there was another conference called the People's Forum, where by the sound of it, Georgie was playing a big part, where a 35,000 people crew came together saying that all these political and business leaders in the official meeting down the road had no idea what was going on in the world, and we needed a revolution. So, in Rio, a document was published called The Future We Want. Well, you would think that any time human beings, business leaders, government leaders, take 40 years to study a topic, progress would have been made by now. And if you take one snapshot, you know that that's not true. We live in a world where every 6 seconds a child dies from hunger. Another child has just died. And now one more. 18,000 children die every day from hunger. And there is enough food to not have one die. It's a scandal. The amount of damage we're doing to the environment is unbelievable. The amount of emissions we're putting up in the atmosphere is beyond acceptability. In 4 or 5 weeks from now, many of us will be gathering in Doha, Qatar, to talk about the climate change negotiations. Serious people, country leaders, will be negotiating a 2-degree warming agreement around climate change. No doubt they will fail to reach agreement again, but they're talking and aiming for 2 degrees. But if you listen to the IEA, the International Energy Agency, it is bullshit. We are on track to 5 degrees warming in this planet. 2 degrees is just a dream. It won't happen. And this is not hippie scientists telling us something is going wrong. This is engineers from the energy space telling us something is going wrong. And in the meantime, the population just continues to grow. And it's not only the fact that we're going to go from 7 to 9 or 10 billion people on the planet, it's also the fact that we're doubling or even more, growing our middle class from 2 to 5 billion consumers, which for the average business person like myself is a fabulous opportunity. More and more people need food, more and more people will consume. The problem is we live in a resource-constrained world. We do not have the resources to deal with all this. So at WBCSD, 2 years ago, we wrote a book called Vision 2050. To the point that I think you made, we're going 100 miles an hour towards a cliff. The world as we know it is not sustainable. Business as usual cannot continue. We need a transformation, and we need it now. In that book, we described, and I'll show 1 or 2 pictures of it, what that world was going to look like, but we also said the first 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, will be the turbulent teens. And if one thing in that book is right, it is the turbulent teens. And I can show you 100 pictures showing you what has happened since that book was published. Economy is in the dumps everywhere, whether it was the banking crisis in 2008, the euro crisis, the global demand collapse that we're seeing today. Weather patterns are shifting. How cynical a world have we created that only when New York gets hit by a storm, the US elections is willing to face up to the fact that climate change is an issue. While months before that, the droughts in the Midwest for the 3rd year running were decreasing the crops. Floods in this part of the world are on the agenda. And wherever you look in the world, the Arab Spring was mentioned, the youth unemployment in Southern Europe is a big issue, Japan's energy policy is a big issue, South Africa's mining is a big issue, villages in China rising up against corruption is a big issue, social tension in our machine is going to the hilt. So we're living in an incredibly interesting and complex world. The economy is in a crisis, the weather or climate is in a crisis, and socially it's an enormous mess. Tell me what part of our system is working. Not much. So with all this knowledge, we came to Rio. And within the UN, and I don't hope there are too many UN representatives in the room, people aren't allowed to say these words, but Rio was a complete failure. We walked out of there with an agreement. We wrote on it the future we want. This is not a populist call. This is just a state of the world. We walked out of there with a document that described the future we want, but it was so fake, so not actionable. The only good news that came out of it is there was uniform agreement, alignment, and attention for a thing called natural capital. And we'll talk about that later when Pavan comes on stage to talk about his deep coalition. The one thing I hope, and to Dorji's point, I have said if in 20 years from now we'll come back to Rio for Rio plus 40, I might be there with a walking stick and all, I know. I might not even make it, who knows. But when we look back, we will look at Rio plus 20 as the conference where business took over, where business took the lead in fixing some of the challenges which we have. I was in Rio plus 20, so I'm part of the system. I got to make a speech to the world leaders, and this was the one slide I used. We all know why we were in Rio. We all know why we're here in Singapore in a sustainable development talk. We know if we put our minds together what it is we need to do. We certainly know when we need to do it, which is not 5 years from now in the next big negotiation. We need to act now. So if the why, the what, and the when are figured out, there's only one question left. and that is how are we going to do it? And not just how are we going to do it in a nice pet project, how are we going to do this at scale is the question that we need to address. I'm from business. I used to be a CEO of a large company. I represent 200 of the largest businesses in the world. I am convinced that business can take the lead in providing these solutions. And there's plenty of examples. If I had more time, I could show you hundreds of pictures of businesses working on great ideas, and some of them were mentioned in the panel just now. But I also know that if I add up all the social responsibility projects and pilot cases and whatever else people are doing, we are not even close to fixing the problems. We need scale. Because if you listen to the scientists, we are overstepping the planetary boundaries in an incredible way, much more than people realize. I'll show the page, I think. So, WBCSD, 2 years ago, published its vision, which is still the vision today, that in 2050, there will be 9+, maybe 10 billion people on planet Earth. They must all live well, i.e. we need to eradicate poverty, give people access to education, to healthcare, and together we must get back within the boundaries of the planet. And that is an immense challenge that we need to face. So if you look at this vision, you can download it at wbcsd.org, then you'll find words for 2050 in the circle around this table. And it is not incremental change. Please do not fall asleep thinking, I'm doing nice little things and my team is so happy that we're doing this. We need radical transformation and we need it quickly. My tongue, my mother tongue, is not the English mother tongue. So occasionally, I have to pick up a dictionary to understand what the hell it is I'm trying to tell you. I apologize. So recently, I picked up the dictionary and looked for radical transformation in a short term. You know what I found? Revolution, Dorji. You're totally right, man. We need revolution. And this cannot be done when we focus on 2050. I mean, I'll be dead by then, you know. I'm not going to have big fights with any of you about 2050. But 2020, I will be concerned about. We need this radical transformation in place by 2020, and we need until 2050 to scale it up so that it reaches every corner and every citizen of the planet. So some of you might be asking, great stories, another clown who's paid to make speeches. What can I do about it? 4 things, I would argue. First, check your own lifestyle. And that's very hard, you know. Who of you still drives Porsches? Or Ferraris, or big Mercedeses, or stuff like that? You can't do that anymore, you know. Just stop it, forget it. How much water is needed to produce your shirt? Are you still eating beef? 1 kilo of beef costs 10,000 liters of water to produce. In a water-scarce world, that is irresponsible. Stop eating beef. Okay, this is normally the most popular part of the speech. People turn on their Blackberries, think, wow, this is going to be great. Idiot, move the guy out of here. Anyway, so as a company, what can the companies do? Companies must measure. To your point, if you don't measure it, it doesn't get managed. You do not make progress. But it also means in today's world, you need to be incredibly transparent. Because if you're not transparent, the world will make you transparent through the social media. But also, don't forget to bring the good stories out. There's enormous solution and innovation power in business, but we're so shy telling the great stories. And the third thing, when it comes to sustainability, set yourself the same stretch targets as you do in building your business or improving the profitability or the productivity or whatever it may be. Work together in sectors, set standards in sectors, share best practice and increase the level playing field. Cross-sectorial, the idea of making cities sustainable, mobility sustainable, can only be done if more than one industry comes together. And lastly, and that's leading in to what Pavan and the panel later today will talk about, is we need to change the rules of the game. I will admit, and I'm not always popular when I do, I am a capitalist. Very simply, I'm from business, we're capitalists. So what is capitalism? Capitalism is you put financial capital to work, you expect something back. That's what capitalism is. We call put to work capital employed, we want something back, is we want a return for capital employed. That's the language of business. Nothing wrong with it. The only problem is we are only told to maximize returns on financial capital. We're missing two capitals. So we need to start including natural capital and social capital. Once we do that, we have true cost and we will get true value management. Price nature, put it in the P&L, in the balance sheet, in the valuation of business, in the investment decisions coming from the capital markets, and we will get an accelerator and a revolution that will put business in the lead. I am getting sick and tired of debates on panels, whether we should do it with, without, against. I mean, there's no other way than business, government, citizens, NGOs working together to solve this. It's way too complex for any of these entities to carry it alone. Like I said, I'm totally honored to be in Singapore. I mean, I've been to Singapore, I don't know how many times ago. 15 years ago, I would think, wow, you would be in Singapore with China growing up next to you. That's got to be tough. But the way you've cracked that, became a regional economic powerhouse, is amazing. Now all you need to figure out is one thing: Singapore. How will you scale up sustainability? So this was the introduction. Let me go back to this slide. We're today launching BCSD Singapore, which is amazing. So 5 companies have decided to be the founding members. I would now like to ask Dato Jeo Hao, President of Apical Group Limited, if you're in the room, to come forward and make a short statement. Thank you.